Behind every picture-perfect love story lies the hidden truth. For Julia Trubkina and Brandon Gibbs, stars of 90 Day Fiancé, that truth was darker than anyone could imagine. Their romance began with love and hope, but ended with betrayal, debt, and heartbreak. Brandon became trapped in nearly $200,000 of gambling debt through online platforms. He kept the secret from Julia, all while pressuring her to help cover his losses. When he could no longer hide the truth and failed to repay the loans, a lawsuit was filed. Brandon was arrested, and the court sentenced him to 1 year in prison. With the truth exposed, Julia could no longer bear the pressure and pain. She divorced him and, later, chose to start a new life by marrying a man named Zach. To understand how it came to this, we must go back to the beginning. Julia entered the show as a fiery, outspoken woman from Russia. She was passionate, determined, and unafraid to stand her ground. Brandon, a soft-spoken man from Virginia, seemed like her opposite. He grew up on his parents' farm in Dinwiddie County, surrounded by chores, traditions, and family control. Together, they were an odd pair. Julia was adventurous and independent, while Brandon represented stability and routine. Their journey on television quickly became one of the most talked-about stories in the franchise. Fans questioned if Julia could adapt to farm life and whether Brandon could stand up to his controlling parents, Betty and Ron. Yet despite all the doubts, viewers saw love between them. Julia teased Brandon's shyness, and Brandon admired Julia's fiery spirit. They laughed, argued, and dreamed together. They eventually married, posted sweet moments online, and even discussed building a family. On screen, everything looked perfect. But behind closed doors, Brandon was hiding something Julia could never have guessed. He had developed a secret obsession, online gambling. At first glance, Brandon didn't seem like the type. He was polite, quiet, and grew up working with animals, fixing fences, and following his parents' rules. Yet inside, he carried a restlessness no one saw. One night, while scrolling online, he stumbled upon an ad promising quick wins. Out of curiosity, he placed a small bet of $50. When it doubled to $120, his heart raced. For the first time, he felt powerful. He thought maybe gambling could give him enough to move Julia and himself off the farm. He didn't tell her. Julia hated gambling, and to him, it was just harmless fun. But harmless fun soon became an addiction. Brandon started staying up late, long after Julia went to bed, glued to flashing screens filled with poker tables, spinning slots, and sports bets. Some nights he won hundreds, but other nights he lost it all. Each loss only convinced him to try again. The money vanished quickly. Credit cards were maxed out. Payday loans piled up. A small debt of $5,000 ballooned to $20,000, then $50,000, and eventually exploded into nearly $200,000. Brandon lived in constant panic. He hid letters marked final notice and deleted angry emails from creditors. Julia began noticing the changes. Brandon was moody, distracted, and distant. Their bank accounts showed strange withdrawals. When she confronted him, he brushed it off with excuses about farm expenses or bills. Julia wanted to believe him. She had given up her country, her family, and her independence to be with him. She told herself he wouldn't lie to her. But the cracks in his story grew too large to ignore. The truth came crashing down one afternoon when Julia opened the mailbox. Inside was a thick envelope stamped in red, notice of default. The papers revealed the shocking number, $200,000 in unpaid debt. That evening, she spread the documents across the kitchen table, her hands trembling. "Brandon," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What is this? What have you done to us?" The kitchen was silent except for the papers shifting in her hands. Brandon stood frozen in the doorway, staring at her tear-streaked face and the mountain of debt notices. For a moment, he thought about lying again, but it was too late. $200,000, Brandon, Julia said, her voice rising. 200,000. Brandon lowered his head, ashamed. "Julia, I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I thought I could fix it before you found out." "Fix it?" Julia slammed the papers on the table. "You've ruined us. Do you know what this means? This isn't just your problem. This is our marriage, our future. How could you hide this from me?" Julia felt the ground beneath her slip away. She had trusted Brandon with everything, only to realize he had been drowning in lies. Her mind raced with questions. How could he gamble so much in secret? What else had he hidden? The betrayal cut deeper than the money. It destroyed her trust. Desperate, Brandon tried to explain. It started small, Julia. Just little bets. I thought I could win big and give us more. A house, a better life. I wanted to make you happy. Julia let out a bitter laugh, almost a sob. A better life? You've destroyed the one we had. Do you think I care about money like this? Do you think I wanted you to gamble behind my back? He reached out to touch her, but she pulled away. Don't you dare, she snapped. The days that followed were chaos. Julia couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the debt notices, the lies, the betrayal. Brandon tried to comfort her, but she was inconsolable. Their home, once filled with laughter and playful teasing, turned into a place of silence and anger. The phone rang constantly with creditors demanding payment, threatening legal action. Julia felt humiliated and trapped. You've ruined everything, she told Brandon again and again. Drowning in guilt, Brandon begged her to stay by his side to help him find a way out. But the more he begged, the more she felt suffocated. The debt had spiraled beyond repair. Missed payments and defaulted loans turned into lawsuits. Creditors no longer threatened, they acted. Brandon's arrest soon followed. The court found him guilty, sentencing him to 1 year in prison. For Julia, the marriage was already broken. The pressure, the humiliation, and the betrayal were too much. She filed for divorce. Later, determined to rebuild her life, Julia remarried a man named Zach. For her, it was a chance at stability and peace after years of turmoil. The story of Brandon and Julia began with love and hope. Fans believed they could overcome differences, family interference, and cultural clashes. But in the end, it wasn't their differences that destroyed them. It was secrets, addiction, and lies. What looked like a fairy tale romance on TV became a cautionary tale of trust shattered and love lost. That a lawsuit was filed against Brandon by one of the online gambling creditors. The official notice arrived one morning, sealed in an envelope that felt heavier than the world itself. Brandon opened it in silence, his face pale as he read the words. Julia snatched the paper from his hands and scanned it herself. Her heart dropped. This is it, she whispered. This is real. They're taking you to court. Brandon collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands. For so long he had tried to deny it, to pretend the problem wasn't real. But now he couldn't run from it anymore. That night, Julia sat across from him, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can do this anymore. I can't live like this, Brandon. I didn't come here to watch my life fall apart. Brandon's eyes filled with tears. Julia, please don't leave me. I need you. I'll fix this. I promise. Just give me a chance. But Julia shook her head. You had your chances. You had so many. And every time you chose to lie. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. The secret was no longer hidden. The storm had arrived, and Julia Trubkina was left to face it. Once bright and outspoken, the woman viewers saw laughing on television now found herself in a reality clouded by shame, betrayal, and financial ruin. Julia lay awake night after night, staring at the ceiling. Her mind refused to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the number, $200,000. It was a mountain too high to climb. She thought of the sacrifices she had made, leaving her family in Russia, giving up her independence, moving to America to build a future with Brandon. She had believed in his promises of stability. Now, all of it felt like a cruel joke. Beside her, Brandon tossed and turned, whispering apologies that Julia no longer had the strength to answer. Silence filled the space between them louder than any argument. The creditors didn't stop. Day and night, the phone rang. Unknown numbers flashed on the screen. Sometimes Julia picked up, only to hear harsh voices demanding repayment. Other times Brandon rushed to answer, leaving the room to hide his shame. But there was no hiding anymore. Each letter in the mail, each notice taped to their door, was a reminder of how far they had fallen. Julia felt trapped, forced to bear not only the financial consequences, but also the public humiliation. They were reality TV stars, after all. Fans watched their every move. How long before someone found out? How long before their secret appeared in headlines? At first, Julia tried to be supportive. She told herself marriage was about standing together through hard times. But resentment grew. Each time she looked at Brandon, she didn't see her husband. She saw the lies that had destroyed her trust. "You didn't just ruin your life, Brandon," she snapped one evening. "You ruined mine. Do you even care what this has done to me?" Brandon, his face pale and sunken from stress, whispered, "I'm sorry, Julia. I never wanted this for us." But his apologies, repeated again and again, began to feel empty. As the lawsuit moved forward, Julia was dragged deeper into the nightmare. Court dates were set. Lawyers became involved. Each document and form was a reminder of the chaos Brandon had created. She sat beside him in the lawyer's office, arms crossed, jaw tight, as repayment plans, settlements, and even the possibility of prison were discussed. At one point, the lawyer turned to her. "If the debt cannot be repaid, this will affect you too. Your accounts, your assets, your future." Julia's heart sank. What future? She thought bitterly. The emotional weight became unbearable. Julia snapped at friends, withdrew from family, and even avoided social media. She couldn't keep pretending life was normal while her world collapsed. At home, arguments became routine. She demanded answers Brandon couldn't give. She demanded solutions he didn't have. "Do something," she screamed one night, slamming her fist on the table. "Find a way out of this. Don't just sit there waiting for everything to collapse." But Brandon sat frozen, his easygoing nature gone, replaced by despair. One evening, after another long day of phone calls and paperwork, Julia sat alone on the couch. Tears streamed down her face. "This isn't what I wanted," she whispered. "This isn't the life I dreamed of." For the first time, she allowed herself to think the unthinkable. "Maybe I can't stay. Maybe this marriage is already over." She looked at Brandon slumped in a chair across the room, his eyes hollow, his spirit broken. And in that painful moment, she realized she no longer saw him as her partner. She saw him as her burden. The day of the court hearing came like a storm. For weeks, Julia had dreaded it. Now it was here. The courthouse was cold and intimidating. She walked beside Brandon, her steps heavy, her face pale. She wore a plain black dress, not for style, but to disappear. Brandon looked worse. His suit hung loosely on his thin frame, his shoulders hunched, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. As they entered, Julia felt eyes on them. Some people recognized them from television. Others saw just another man in trouble with his wife by his side. Julia wanted to vanish. Inside, the legal process unfolded with sharp precision. Lawyers spoke in clipped tones, presenting documents, listing debts, emphasizing Brandon's failures. Each figure, 10,000 here, 50,000 there, stabbed at Julia's heart. The prosecution painted Brandon as reckless and irresponsible. They showed transaction records, screenshots from gambling platforms, bank statements showing thousands lost in minutes. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said firmly, "this is not simply mismanagement. This is a pattern of addiction, of dishonesty, of total disregard for his responsibilities." Julia lowered her gaze, humiliated. Every word felt like a public shaming. Brandon's lawyer tried to soften the picture. He spoke of a man overwhelmed, caught in a trap, desperate to provide more for his wife. He reminded the court of Brandon's years of hard work on the family farm and his deep regret. Brandon stood and addressed the judge, his voice shaking. "I made mistakes. I thought I could fix them, but I only made things worse. I never meant to hurt Julia or anyone. I take full responsibility." Julia watched him, torn. Part of her pitied the broken man in front of her, but another part felt numb. She had heard it all before. The apologies no longer meant anything. After hours of testimony and evidence, the judge delivered the decision. "Mr. Gibbs, the court finds that you have repeatedly failed to meet your financial obligations. Your gambling debts, your dishonesty, and your inability to resolve these matters have left no alternative. You are hereby sentenced to 1 year in prison." The words echoed through the courtroom. Brandon's face went pale, his mouth slightly opened as though he couldn't breathe. Julia's hands trembled, but she didn't reach for him. Not this time. The gavel struck. And just like that, their world collapsed. Brandon was escorted away in handcuffs. Julia watched in stunned silence as her husband, the man she once danced with, laughed with, dreamed with, was let out like a criminal. His eyes searched for hers, desperate, pleading. But Julia couldn't bring herself to look back. She stood alone in the courtroom, surrounded by strangers, her heart heavy with anger and grief. The days that followed were some of the darkest Julia had ever known. News of Brandon's sentencing spread quickly online. Fans of 90 Day fans say they speculated, blogs reported, and social media filled with comments. Some pied her, others mocked her. Julia tried to ignore it, but the humiliation cut deep. She felt like the world was laughing at her pain. She wanted to scream at them, to tell them they didn't know the full story, but deep down, she knew she had lost control of her own narrative. She visited Brandon once in prison during those early weeks. He looked smaller, behind the glass, his hands clutching the phone, his eyes desperate. "Julia, please," he begged. "Don't give up on me. I'll change. I'll be better. Just wait for me." Julia stared at him, her heart torn in two. But when she spoke, her words were flat, lifeless. "I don't know if I can, Brandon. I don't know if I want to." And with that, she walked away, leaving him to face the consequences of his choices alone. When the prison doors closed behind Brandon Gibbs, Julia Trubkina's life changed forever. For the first time since arriving in America, she felt completely alone. The cameras of 90 Day Fiancé were gone. The excitement of their whirlwind romance had faded, and what remained was a hollow silence that filled every corner of her life. The house they once shared felt different now. Brandon's absence was everywhere. The empty chair, at the kitchen table, the silence in the evenings where his nervous laugh once filled the air. Julia would walk past. His belongings, the shirts he left behind, the pictures of their wedding tucked into dusty frames, and feel a wave of anger, sadness, and nostalgia all at once. At night, she sometimes caught herself reaching across the bed instinctively, only to find cold sheets where Brandon used to lie. But instead of comfort, the thought of him only reminded her of betrayal. Brandon tried to stay connected. From prison, he called Julia whenever he could. The color calls came at odd hours, the robotic voice always announcing before. His voice broke through. "This is a call from an inmate at Julia," he would say, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm sorry. I think about you every day. Please don't give up on me. I'll change when I get out. I'll be better." At first, Julia answered. She listened. Sometimes she cried. Other times, she sat in silence, while Brandon poured out apologies and promises. But over time, she began to dread the calls. His words felt like chains dragging her back into a life she no longer wanted. She started letting the phone ring, ignoring his desperate attempts to cling to her. With Brandon gone, Julia faced the world alone. Friends she thought she could count on slowly drifted away, some not knowing what to say, others judging her for staying as long as she had. Even fans of the show turned against her online. Some comments mocked her. She should have known better marrying Brandon. Others pied her. Poor Julia. She gave up everything for him. But none of them knew the real pain. Julia felt trapped between humiliation and freedom. Free from Brandon's lies, but burdened with the shadow of his mistakes. Julia tried to rebuild her life. She took on more work, tried to distract herself with hobbies, and even considered moving away from the small town that reminded her of everything she lost. But it wasn't easy. Financially, she was still tied to Brandon's mess. Emotionally, she carried scars that wouldn't fade. Each time she tried to focus on herself, the past pulled her back. Even mundane things became heavy. Grocery shopping alone, paying bills by herself, walking past. Couples holding hands. All of it reminded her of what she thought she had and how quickly it had crumbled. One evening, Julia sat on the couch staring at the wall, the silence pressing in on her. She thought about the years she had spent with Brandon, the sacrifices, the love, the fights, the dreams. And for the first time, she admitted to herself, I don't love him anymore. The realization was like a weight lifted and a knife to the heart at the same time. She felt relief, but also grief for the woman she used to be, the one who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. Brandon, meanwhile, wrote to her constantly, letters filled with apologies, confessions, and desperate pleas. I know I failed you, one letter. Read. I know I ruined everything, but please don't give up on me. I need you when I get out. You're all I have left. Julia read them, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing bitterly. She kept them in a drawer, unable to throw them away, but unwilling to let them soften her heart. Each letter only confirmed what she already knew. Brandon was a chapter of her life that had ended. The year that Brandon spent behind bars felt like an eternity for Julia. Each passing day was a test of her strength, her patience, and her ability to survive in a country that often felt more foreign than ever. But as the months went by, Julia's heart hardened. The love she once had for Brandon was replaced by resentment, exhaustion, and the heavy truth she could no longer ignore. She needed to let go. Julia's breaking point came one afternoon in early spring. She had just returned home from work when the phone rang. Another collect call from Brandon. Against her better judgment, she answered, Julia. Brandon's voice crackled through the line, filled with urgency. I've been thinking about us, about when I get out we can start fresh, you and me. I promise. No more lies, no more gambling. We can move forward. Just give me one more chance. Julia clenched the phone, her chest tight. For months she had listened to these promises over and over, but nothing changed. His words felt like a broken record, rehearsed and empty. No, Brandon, she finally said, her voice shaking but firm. There are no more chances. You destroyed everything. I can't do this anymore. There was silence on the other end. Then, a desperate plea. Julia, please don't say that. Don't give up on me. You're all I have. But Julia had already made her decision. For the first time, she hung up on him. That night, Julia sat at the kitchen table with a blank divorce petition in front of her. The papers looked simple, almost too simple for what they represented. The end of her marriage, the cutting of ties to the man she once believed was her soulmate. She hesitated, her pen hovering above the page. Memories flooded her mind. Their first kiss, their wedding vows, the playful moments fans had adored on 90 Day Fiancé. But then came the darker memories, the lies, the debts, the humiliation, the endless pain. With trembling hands, she began to write her name, and with each stroke of the pen, Julia felt the weight of her decision. Filing the paperwork was one of the hardest things Julia had ever done. She walked into the courthouse alone, her steps echoing in the hallway. At the clerk's desk, she handed over the documents, her heart pounding in her chest.